Women stayed home and took care of the families, and men went to work. That has clearly changed, but the model of work hasn't changed. We are unfortunately going backwards when it comes to gender equity, not forwards.
Welcome to the NWI podcast, brought to you by the National Wellness Institute. I'm your host, Caroline Carlson, and this is the podcast for wellness professionals and enthusiasts who want to amplify the quality of their lives in all 6 dimensions of wellness. Don't worry about taking notes. I'll do that for you. And you can find them at nwipodcast.org. If you enjoy our podcast, please consider joining the National Wellness Institute. Your membership ensures quality programming to support the wellness industry. By signing up, you receive many benefits to further your wellness career and interests. Call Sherry at NWI at 715-342-2969 today, or visit our website at nationalwellness.org and click on the membership tab. Mim Senft, CWWS, GBA, AAI, RYT, is President and CEO of Motivity Partnerships Incorporated, a consulting firm dedicated to providing integrated, evidence-based solutions for organizations to create a thriving workforce. She is also the co-founder and executive director for Global Women for Wellbeing, a nonprofit membership organization focused on empowering more healthy female leadership for a more sustainable world. Mim Senft has over 20 years of corporate experience in project management, benefits design, and wellness program strategy and implementation. She co-founded Global Women for Wellbeing in 2016 along with Nancy Board and Deb Smolensky. Mim is a member of NWI and has served on the board of directors. She is a member of the Global Women's Institute Future of Well Work Initiative, the American Sustainable Business Council, UN Women Metro, IFEBP, and WellCOA. She is a regular speaker at conferences and roundtables on topics related to employee benefits and corporate wellness well-being programs and women's health, well-being, and leadership issues. Mim, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It is truly a pleasure to be here.
So you started GW4W in 2016. Who else did you start the organization with, and how did it get started?
So it started as a couple of conversations at the beginning of 2016 with Nancy and Deb and a couple other people in the wellness world, benefits world, and gelled at a dinner conversation that happened at the Shine event at Harvard School of Public Health, which was June of 2016. And so sitting around that table were women that I'm sure some people on this podcast will recognize: Jessica Grossmeyer, Jennifer Pitts, Lee Stringer, Mari Ryan, and a variety of other incredibly accomplished women in our field. And the discussion was, here we are, it's 2016, we're still having many of the conversations that we were having when many of us started our careers. What can we do to make this different? And I think it's really amazing that this happened before, #MeToo and, the Women's March. So it was, we're really excited because we think it's right time, right message.
Yeah.
And we wanted to do a deeper dive into, with all these women's organizations that have been out there, with all the positive things that have been done, why are we not moving forward faster? What are the gaps? What are the connections that need to be made in order for us to make this better for the next generation of women? And so we said, we don't want to just complain about it. We want to do something that is action-oriented and that can truly make positive change. And so here we are today.
How does GW4W help to bring siloed resources together to better support women?
It's a really good question. Some of the topics that you typically talk about when we talk about women's issues: domestic abuse, sexual abuse, women in leadership, women in law, all these different silos. And trying to get folks to understand that if we're truly going to get women to move forward, we have to see that these things are interconnected. It's more systems thinking behind it. So we want to take these diverse pieces, we want to take these wonderful organizations, each in their own right doing good work, and starting to make these connections between them so that it becomes a virtuous economy. I'd kind of describe it that way. So we have partnerships that are helping each other instead of people trying to work in these little tiny silos. Again, they're all doing great work, but if we are truly going to be impactful, we need to join together. We need to find this common ground. Mm-hmm. And that is clearly played out in the World Economic Forum's report that came out on November 2nd, 2017, which showed that we are unfortunately going backwards when it comes to gender equity, not forwards. And they expect it to take at least 100 years globally for women to have equity. And that means health equity, leadership equity, salary parity. We don't think that's acceptable. We think we need to move forward faster. We think it is an imperative if we're going to have a better world. And we know that together we can do this.
So in asking you what GW4W plans to accomplish, is that the complete list? Do you have other specific goals in mind that you haven't mentioned?
Yes, actually. Right. So you have to be more specific. I mean, first and foremost, we are a research-oriented organization. And why do we want to do that? We know that people get very emotional about issues. Breast cancer is a perfect example. There has been great strides and just so applaud all the wonderful work that's been done around that. But again, how do things like stress, caretaking, financial well-being impact whether or not somebody gets breast cancer? We don't know the answer to that. So that's an example of how we're starting to, put the pieces together. Because we have so many research scientists, female research scientists involved in the group, our first project was to take 3 steps back and say, let's do research literature reviews. Let's figure out what has been done, where are the gaps, so that we can start to understand how the pieces fit together and where the most need is. Mm-hmm. So I'm very happy to say that we've completed those first 2 research literature reviews, and we'll be releasing the white paper based on that research this year. We are very big on the human connection. I think all of us in wellness know that the human touch and us being able to share and lift each other up is very, very important. And so we have done multiple events around the country. We've done 12 or 13 now since we officially launched. We'll be doing many more this coming year. And we're big on bringing together people from a variety of backgrounds. We want cross-disciplinary conversation. So this is another area where we look at things a little bit differently. You'll see organizations that are just, let's advance women in law, or let's advance women in engineering, or let's talk about women in domestic abuse situations. When we look at gender equity issues, it's imperative that it is systemic thinking behind this. So that's why you have to have this cross-disciplinary conversation. In addition to that, we're focused on the business aspect of this. We understand that if women are not in a position of financial well-being, they are going to be behind the 8 ball. I mean, they're definitely not going to be able to compete with their male counterparts. We typically outlive our male counterparts. A really interesting example of a big disparity for women is when women go out and start their own businesses. Mm-hmm. In general, women get about 25% of the venture capital that their male counterparts get.
Really?
Yeah. So if you're going to start a business and you're already getting much less than your male counterpart, obviously that's a huge barrier. But what if we support each other? And so that is another piece of what Global Women for Wellbeing is working on. We are very focused on what we call member partners. So we have a big belief in conscious capitalism. Mm-hmm. People should work hard. They should be rewarded for their work. But we can all rise together when we support each other. And so what we want to do is highlight women's organizations, women's businesses, companies that focus on women's health and well-being issues. And we want to be their nonprofit arm so that they get to support the research so that we can answer the questions, and we get to help their business grow. So it's not just the research, it's also business acumen. It's amazing women sharing their words of wisdom. I can tell you that we've had the CEO of Canyon Ranch who's spoken for us, who in her prior life was the first woman to ever hold a senior position at GM in their 100-year history. And so she spoke at our event last April, and that's the kind of storytelling. It's not just about, can we share best practices, but what is the real experience of women in leadership? And we also have a big focus on diversity. Mm-hmm. that tends to get missed. I think that many of us know in the wellness world or many of these health and well-being conferences we go, and it's not a very diverse audience.
Yeah.
And yet we know that there are major differences for the Black and Brown communities out there. And I was lucky enough to be able to speak at a conference called On Purpose in Atlanta earlier this year, where, to be very blunt, I was one of 4 white people in the room. And it's so important for us to listen to each other and to learn from each other so that we can build these bridges and have this common voice.
Right.
So you can see that it's a combination of research, connection, business to business support, and also working towards not just mentoring, but advocacy for each other in the way that men have an old boys network. We want to see an old girls network.
Now, you connect women's health and well-being directly to their capacity to lead well.
Yes,
Is
absolutely.
this any different than how men lead?
Good question. I think we can get caught up in male versus female. I think that everybody's on a spectrum. So it's looking at more what we consider traditionally male attributes as a leader and female attributes as a leader, and what we need moving into the 21st century. So this gets to, why do we need healthy female leadership for a sustainable world? This came out of a conversation that Professor Beer had, and he is from Harvard's Business School at the Shine event. And he talked about head, heart, hands leaders. That moving forward, this highly competitive environment that you usually see in most workplaces is not helpful to us when you look at the competitive nature in the short term, quarterly returns versus what are we doing, not just in the short term, but what's going to be an investment in the long term so that we have sustainable businesses, sustainable communities. And those require, according to his research, what we might consider to be more feminine qualities. So not just smart, and having business acumen, but also looking at the power of empathy. So that means, do we understand what our people do best? And can we actually become leaders that can empower them to do what they do best? And so there is a part of that is empathetic. They may not work or be like you, but as a leader, it's up to you to understand how to bring the best out in them and how to make those connections between teams. So that's considered, that power of connection is considered maybe more of a feminine quality in some of the research that we've seen out there. And then the third part of that is the hands part. So we talk about, carbon footprint, or what we don't want to leave behind. We argue for what we do want to leave behind. What is the good that we can do together? What is the connectivity that we can do together? Recognizing that I do one thing very well, you do another thing very well. And when we bring these two pieces together, now we're stronger together. And so more of a honeycomb kind of approach to how we build businesses. You're seeing a little of that in WeWorks, different types of people coming together on different projects. And interestingly, I think it's kind of like the way the film industry has always been, right? Every project, they bring together different types of people for that particular project. And I think you're going to see more of that going forward. And so we see it as a real opportunity for women to step in and step up and be able to provide leadership that has a more whole person, whole team, whole company approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. And discussing the differences between male and female leadership, perhaps the one thing that seems to be consistent is women feeling like if they're in business and of course they have a family or they have other obligations, as is often the case, especially with regard to, say, sandwich generation who may be taking care of little ones and then taking care of their seniors, the tendency to feel like they have to be superwoman. Does GW4W touch on the importance of women truly learning to slow down and take care of themselves?
Right. I think that is extraordinarily important. So one of the things that you'll see in this white paper when it comes out, to your point, is how caregiving sits underneath so many of these issues.
Yeah.
So domestic abuse, right? I've got little kids at home. I don't have enough income to go and get my own apartment. Am I really going to leave? So that's just an example.
Yeah.
Or this also goes on the flip side of, I'm a CEO, I've got children at home. Do I go to my board meeting and now my child's sick, or my parent is suddenly getting Alzheimer's? And the research clearly shows that caretaking issues impact women at a much higher level globally. This is something that is not a political issue. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, whether you are low income, high income, caretaking issue sits under this for virtually all women. And here we are making up almost 50% of the, well, we do now make up 50% of the potential global workforce.
Yeah.
And so this particular issue needs to be front and center for the workplace. If we do not address this, we are going to continue to burn out women. We are going to continue to see women drop out of the workforce at, they reach a certain level. I know we've seen in the more corporate environments that women will do really, really well. And then they hit about 35, somewhere in that age range in the US. And that's where you start to see them drop off. The pipeline starts to dry up. And it's because we really, as a country, have not looked at how do we redesign the workplace so that this works for men and women and families so that everybody thrives. When we are talking about this from a third world perspective, we're talking about some even more dire kinds of situations.
Yes.
So women working and their husbands taking all of their salary. They have no control over their money and how that impacts them and the kind of stress. So this gets to your point of how do we help women take care of themselves? We're moms, we're caretakers. I mean, you may not be a mom, but you might be an aunt, or you might be a woman that doesn't have children and you've chosen to have a career and not had a family, but you may have elderly parents now that you're taking care of.
Yes.
And it is amazing how often we will put ourselves last. And so when we look at things, and again, we don't have all these, this is why the research has to get done. We know that women get dementia at 3 times the rate of men, even when you adjust for age.
Yes.
We don't know why yet. On the flip side of that, young girls are showing up with anxiety at 3 times the rate of young men. This is like age 13 to 17. So what the long-term effects of that are going to be for them over the course of their lifetime. We all know that impacts us on a physiological level. So does that impact our brain chemistry, our how our immune systems hold up over time? And so there are a lot of questions that need to be asked. And so this idea of, at the very least, how are you caring for yourself? I know that there are multiple environments, and I know this from my worksite wellness side, and we're having so many discussions about this with some of my clients. How do we get people to turn off? And if you are expected to be answering emails 24/7, 365, and take care of a home, and potentially take care of parents, these are barriers that are almost insurmountable. You are going to burn out. You will get sick. And we have to be smarter about listening to that inner voice that each one of us has. We get pushed because, again, we are in a more, and it's no fault of the men. I don't want to, sound like, we're male bashing, because we're not. I mean, the workplace was designed where, for the most part, women stayed home and took care of the families and men went to work. That has clearly changed, but the model of work hasn't changed. And so that's why we need to start thinking about this from a different perspective so that everybody thrives. So what's the financial reason for that from a business perspective? You can say, well, that's great, ma'am. That sounds really wonderful. And of course, that's the right thing to do. But how do we get a CFO to really think about that?
Yeah.
The research shows that when you go from 0 to 30% qualified, and I do want to be clear about that, qualified female leadership at the top of your organization, in general, you get a 15% increase in your profit margin.
Wow.
15% increase in your profit margin. I don't think there's any CEO on the planet that if you went to them and said, look, we've got a almost foolproof way of increasing your profit margin. Are you willing to do that? They would say, oh yeah, that sounds great.
Now, you're saying increase in profit margin from solely male leadership?
Right. So if you have 30% female leadership at the top, right, that balances out, it's not to shove out, please, don't ever want to say that, but it's a more balanced conversation. There are skill sets that get brought to the table. And this was in Harvard Business Review. This is actual research-based numbers. This isn't conjecture.
Right.
This is something that we need to do. But it's perception versus reality. There
Right.
are still these barriers that women have to overcome. There are still many, many conversations that go on behind closed doors. Even if you are not married and not planning on having children, you will still be viewed as somebody of child rearing years.
The potential is there.
Absolutely. And again, this has been played out in research. This is not theoretical. For men that are in the upper echelons of their businesses, there is actually a bias towards giving them a family bump in salary versus their female counterparts. The flip side, when you go down on the lower ends of things, like somebody who's making $15 an hour, women who have families often do not get as much of a raise as their male counterparts that don't have families. So we're actually looking at this on both ends of the spectrum.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this is where we go. We need a network of leaders around the world that, as we do the research, as we make these connections, can take action steps that are developed out of this and push them down through their organizations, not just from the bottom up. We totally, understand that education is one of the key components to getting women, into the workforce and doing better. But it doesn't fully address those barriers that we keep running up against.
Yeah.
And that's why it is so important that it is not just female leadership, but the great men that stand beside us. I cannot overemphasize that without real male support, it is going to be very difficult. And I'm so proud to say that we have amazing, amazing men that have supported our organization, financially showed up at events that are talking about us. It has to be this type of conversation, because just frankly, for women to go and talk to men about this, there are going to be men that are not going to want to hear it. They're not going to want to hear it from us.
Right. Or not believe that it's a real thing.
Absolutely. But if they can hear it from men that they trust from their community, that can have a huge impact. And so many of these men have daughters of their own, and is one of the major reasons that they've stepped up. They're like, I don't want this to happen to my daughter. I think everything that's happened with the #2MeToo movement, which we think is wonderful. It is great to see women standing up. It is great to see voices being heard. And it is very scary for many of those women. So we applaud their courage. And I know that there's been discussion about, well, why did you wait so long? I think any woman knows that if you've been put in a position of fear, had your job threatened, know that you have to pay for your children. And oh my gosh, if I can never get a job again, if I actually step up, what am I going to do? You don't hear a lot of that in the conversation. And we need to be talking about that.
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
Yeah, 100%. How does that connect back to leadership? How does it connect back to our health and well-being? How is this integrated, discussion so that we can move it forward? It is good that there's now a legal defense fund for women in Hollywood, that they've raised money for that. That is great. But preventive, all of us in the wellness world know, we want to move towards a place where we prevent these things.
Yeah, these are really important issues for all of us to address together across socioeconomic boundaries and geographic locations, whether it's Hollywood or it's across the world. They are common problems that affect everybody. And it's important to bring these things out to light.
Right. And I think that, again, it's great that Hollywood's doing it, but they are a very, very small percentage. These are, for the most part, women making a lot more money than the average woman that's out there. And that's why it's good to have their voice. Right. They can get the media's attention, but it is an imperative that we are talking about also the most at risk. Again, that's why it's reaching across the boundaries. We are all in this together. We are all on this common ground. So a couple of the, the topics that we're looking at for this year are focusing on sex trafficking. We are talking to an amazing group called Rethreaded that we will probably be doing an event with them later this year in the Jacksonville area. We're having conversations about the same topic in Atlanta. We have also had an interesting preliminary conversation about bringing in a little bit more of the spiritual conversation to this. Not so much religious, but I think for all of us in the wellness world, we've, NWI has always had spirituality as being part of a holistic way of looking at our lives.
Yes.
Spiritual means different things to different people, whether it is a deep sense of connection to purpose,
Mm-hmm.
or you may have a faith practice that is very important to you and your family or your community. All of these things have crossover and connection. And so it's also building those bridges. It was so exciting to be in Atlanta, and that became part of the conversation. And we were sharing in the room our sense of what spirituality means from a leadership perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a female pastor from a big Black Baptist church that was there, incredible woman, and talking about how they're living that out in their community. There was a professor there, female professor, who was originally from Pakistan and a Muslim. And I was sharing, more of the Jewish perspective. And so it was so exciting to have that kind of open conversation. And so we're talking about, let's bring this more into the conversation.
Yes.
We shy away sometimes from this. And it's with the understanding all of these things bring something valuable to our communities. And it's another place where we can break down silos. We can honor that treating others the way you want to be treated. I think pretty much every major religion talks about this.
Yes.
It's just a core tenet. We talk about this in schools. We want to raise our children this way. And so when we can look at each other from different backgrounds and understand that this is the common ground for us.
Yes.
We want good health for our children. We want opportunity for our children. We want equal pay for all our daughters. We want our sons to have great relationships with the women in their lives. We don't want to shy away from that conversation.
Yeah.
And it may not be, a religious conversation for some people, and that's okay too.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you talk about the golden rule and treating people the way that we would want to be treated. Speaking to those who may be a little bit reticent to want to hear the message, changing perspectives may come to the leadership learning the perspective of the other side and treating other people the way that they want to be treated.
Right.
As opposed to as we, ourselves from our perspective want to be treated.
Right. And I think some of this gets to, and again, depending on where you're, I'm a big fan of evolutionary biology, and I'm fascinated by what we socially are built to do and individually are built to do. This deep sense of community and connection and how core it is to our survival. When we were just small groups of people, and just a million people, I think it was a million people, like when it was 1000 BC. I mean, there were just a million of us. I mean, we're way beyond that on the planet. And how through social media, for better or for worse, we've gotten more and more connected. We go back and forth between getting connected and then wanting to be isolated, connected and isolated. But slowly but surely, we're moving closer and closer towards a true global community. And if you've read the book Sapiens, he argues for that in a pretty intelligent way, I think. I would highly recommend that book. And so that's where we keep coming back to. The media in general keeps trying to get our attention by using divisive language. And everything is breaking news and everything are, these pieces. But at the end of the day, there is so much common ground between us. Yeah. And a perfect example of that, there was a friend of mine from high school who is very conservative, very, very, very conservative. And our views are very different on a variety of topics. But a few years ago, her daughter unfortunately became very ill and was rushed to the hospital and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Wow.
And type 1 diabetes, and everybody knows, is not something that, is that's a genetic thing.
Yes.
So as she started to talk about this on Facebook and the challenges she was having, so it gets to the caretaking issues, right? It's a universal thing, how scary it was for her to learn about all of this and to do what's best. But then she started talking about the cost of insulin and why is it more expensive for my child here in the United States than a mother in the UK? We pay twice as much here. So this gets to, again, that's a health equity issue. Whether you are more conservative or more liberal, no matter what your viewpoint is, that's universal.
Yeah, it is.
You want great care for your child, and that is going to play out over their lifetime so that they have good quality of life. And so that's why we think that is incredibly important. I will say, to be clear, that we do not talk about abortion in any way, shape, or form in our organization. And the reason that I make that so clear is because it is a very divisive issue for people. It is used to divide women in many cases. And so when we formed as an organization, we made the decision to completely take that off the table. That's so important because when we look at the bigger health issues, almost all health research has been done on men and male animals. Let me just repeat that. Almost all health research has been done on men and male animals. That means that when you are being treated for something, your symptoms, the treatment protocols, the amount of drugs that you're being given are based on male physiology in almost all cases.
And that comes right back to men and women experience heart attacks differently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was only discovered about 10 years ago. So that's just one area. And so, again, it's about what is our common ground for all of us. No matter what your background, you don't want your mother being turned away from an emergency room when she is very ill because that doctor doesn't fully understand what's going on. We want a better future for our daughters so that they can lead, so that they can be healthy leaders. And we understand a simple one. Women get carpal tunnel syndrome at 3 times the rate of men. And believe it or not, there's not been any really good research. They think it's because we have smaller wrists, but there's no real answer to how we solve this. So that's just one tiny issue.
Yeah.
There are a ton of them out there. And so that's, again, what we say, let's focus on our common ground here. Let's look at each other and say, my daughter, your daughter, my mother, your mother, our families, our communities are better when we can address these health issues together.
Yes, they are. Now, you're going to be hosting the pre-conference at the National Wellness Institute this June. Tell us about it.
Well, we are very excited to be coming and participating this year. The pre-conference will definitely include the research that we have completed. So we're going to be focusing on this intersection between financial well-being, the caretaking issue, and women's ability to lead. How do we address these barriers in a more impactful way? We are excited to have Mari Ryan speaking. Mari, I know, is very well known by the NWI community, very, very experienced. She owns her own business. So she's going to, and she's also on the Global Women for Wellbeing board. Super excited to have her there. Dr. Tasha Robertson, who has her PhD from Duke University in public health, will be talking more from a diversity perspective. She is an amazing speaker. Her own story, I think, is super inspiring. She is African American, grew up in a small town in Mississippi, and has had an extraordinary career. She recently launched Ms. X Factor, which is a health and well-being platform for women of diversity. She is an advisor to South by Southwest. She's an entrepreneur, also has an app and is a tech health geek. And so just a lot of wisdom to bring around this, as well as being very, very actively involved in mentoring young women of color. And we're also going to have Nancy Board speaking, who is one of our co-founders and is a mental well-being expert. So in her career, she has been involved globally with mental well-being and, in fact, helped build the EAP network across the Pan-Asian community that JP Morgan built. So she brings not just a U.S. perspective on mental health for women, but also a global perspective, and has been leading amazing workshops for women to have a safe space to talk about some of the issues that we normally won't talk about in mixed company. So body image issues and shaming issues and things that, unfortunately, we don't talk about in a way that we need to. And so bringing some of those things to light and understanding how we can do a better job of helping the next generation of women address those things in themselves, and then hopefully keep passing that on from generation to generation. So it's going to be an exciting pre-conference. It is interactive. So this is not just about talking heads. This is very much about some of the great NWI family being in the room and having that shared wisdom. We learn more together. We move forward together. So very excited to be there.
We're very excited to have you there. It's going to be inspiring and very important. It's much needed.
Yeah. And there are so many great women that have been a part of NWI for many, many years. So this just gives all of those women, hopefully, an opportunity to share their stories and those voices and to celebrate that. I think it's important to celebrate the amazing women and all the men that have supported us. So we just want to be clear that men are certainly welcome to come and be a part of that. And we encourage them to be there and be part of that, because we know that there are great men, members of NWI that have supported women in their own way in their own businesses. So thank you. I want to thank them for doing that.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the international reach that your speakers have and that GW4W has and intends to have in making changes to the way that things have always been done and the way that we can come together. How does GW4W build connections for women at all socioeconomic levels and in different geographical locations?
Well, we did make a concerted effort last year to be in many locations around the country so that we could start to touch people in different communities. And that was very successful. So one example of that was the joint event that we did with UN Women in New York. We did an event in Chicago, which I know you attended, which was wonderful. Had some great speakers. And so it's informational, it's inspirational, and it provides the ability to network. We are looking to do the same model internationally. So we're nailing down some dates now for Japan, which we're very excited about. Looks like that's going to be in September. It has been building on the connections that we have, that all of us collectively have in the leadership of Global Women for Wellbeing. And so it's organic, and having these conversations and getting on calls like this and saying, so what are you guys doing? So what we really want to try and do is, again, build the common conversation, because caretaking, salary parity, leadership at all levels is a common conversation. But the cultural differences, Japan, South Africa, Brazil, Turkey, women in Europe, they have different challenges than we have. Women of diversity have different challenges. And so having that cross conversation and bringing it to light. So these will be, we want to live stream these events. We'll be doing a combination of conference type events and events that will be focused on a specific topic like sex trafficking or how women are portrayed in the media, but then also having leadership roundtable conversations that can be live streamed so that we can hear from leaders in different parts of the world. I mean, how exciting is it to say, oh, wow, these women in Japan, it isn't that much different. Oh, but this is very different. Again, as we are building more of a global economy, if you're in an organization that does have offices in other parts of the world, it helps you to better understand what's going on there.
Yes.
So that is hopefully going to be a way to build more and more connections. We are open to helping and partnering with anyone, really, who is interested in actively doing this. We have models around how to do this effectively. We've had great turnout at our events, and it's exciting. And so it becomes the synergy of leadership conversation, member partners talking about their businesses. A great example is one of our founding members. We got her to a venture capitalist. So this was really helpful to her. She was a former Microsoft executive. I mean, just great business person, but needed some connection. It is that power, that bigger power of connection.
Yes, it is.
And globally, this is what we mean about a sustainable world. If we can get around the divisive conversations that we hear in the media, and we can have a more positive voice and show that we can make action steps that are doable for organizations around the world, and then celebrate those wins, this is how we can start to move things forward. So the storytelling part of this, I know that's a big part of what NWI does as well.
Yes.
Tell the stories. Let's honor the people that are already doing the great work. If you have something that you're excited about and want to get started, is there somebody out there that already has a great model that you can learn from instead of starting from scratch? Can we reach across the divides and build these connections so that we have a better world for the next generation and the generation after that?
Yes, your cause is very inspiring, and your work is very much needed.
Well, thank you.
Can you tell our listeners how they can find out more about Global Women for Wellbeing and about you and all of the great work that you have planned, and see some of the wonderful panel discussions and roundtables that you have? I've enjoyed some of those videos very much to see what
Thank
people
you.
are discussing.
Great. So we encourage you to sign up at gw4w.org, and NWI and GW4W does have a reciprocal membership agreement. So if you are an NWI member, you can join us as a member. If you're not ready to do that quite yet, we'd love to have you part of the family. But if you'd just like to get some information, please add your name to our information list, and you can do that through the website. We also encourage you to join us on Facebook. We're pretty active out there. We try and get information out about things that are going on around the world related to women. So when finally women were allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia, we're putting out information about that. It was a great article about some female Olympiads from Nigeria. Mm-hmm. that very inspiring story. So we like to put inspirational things. We also put out information again about new reports, new research. And that will also then get you in touch with events that we'll be doing around the country, including, of course, the pre-conference. We do hope to see many of you at the pre-conference at NWI, and look forward to hearing your voice. So I should say that voice actually does stand for something. So we want to just be clear about that. We believe that you have to have a vision. Without a vision, how can you move forward? We want to make sure that we have opportunity and inspiration, connection, and through all those things, we can empower each other. So when you find that voice for yourself and we join those voices together, we can help create better leadership, healthier leadership, and women can help move things forward so that everybody, men and women, can have a better world.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mim, so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and are very inspired by your organization and everything that you're doing with Global Women for Wellbeing.
Thank you so much.
And we can't wait to see you in June at the conference.
We look forward to seeing everyone there. Thank you.
Registration for the 2018 National Wellness Conference is now open. Register today at nationalwellness.org/NWC. Like what you hear? Please leave us a rating on iTunes and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you on the next episode. Be well.